What's up, everybody? So today we'll be talking about functions. I'm super excited to talk about this, so let's get straight into it. There are three main things that you should know about functions. Firstly, a function is a piece of code that only executes when it is called. Second, a function can accept data in the form of parameters. Parameters are also sometimes called arguments, so if you hear argument, just know that it's talking about a parameter. And third, a function can return data. So when creating a function, you have to start with the def keyword, and def stands for define, because you're defining a function. So we start by saying define, or def, and then the name of our function. And this can be anything. We'll just say like my func. And then we have to do parentheses, and then the colon. And then on the next line, we have to indent 4 spaces, and then any code underneath the indentation will be specific for this function. So in this case, we just say print. Alright, now watch carefully. So when we run our code, see, nothing happens because we haven't called our function yet. All that we've done is define our function. So in order to run our function, we actually have to call it. And to call it, we just type the name of the function followed by the parentheses. And now this is a function call. Line 10 is a function call to my func. So now it's going to execute the function, and it should print hello from inside a function. So to demonstrate, let's run our code, and now you see we get the print statement, because now we've called our function. So functions will only run when they are called. So going back to step 2, a function can accept data in the form of parameters. So if we want to basically pass data into our function, that would look something like this. So inside the parentheses, we can specify our arguments. And arguments and parameters, like I said, can be used interchangeably. They're the same. They're talking about the same thing. So in this case, if we want, let's just say, for example, we wanted to pass in our name as an argument, then we can just say like hello plus name. And now when we call our function, we have to pass data inside the parentheses. So whatever we pass in inside the parentheses will basically be name. So name is just a variable name that will store whatever we pass in to the function. So for example, if I pass in my name and then run our code, you see we get hello Harrison. So our function uses the argument to print whatever name we pass into the function. But what if I don't pass in an argument? So this is going to give us an error because we're not passing in anything for name. Just to show you all, you see we get a type error, my func, missing one required positional argument, which just means that we're just missing the parameter. So we'd have to pass in a parameter explicitly, like we have been doing, like this, or we can have what's called an optional argument. And optional arguments are used to basically fix this error. So if you don't pass anything into the function, your function will still run correctly. And to do an optional argument, just after your argument, you say equals, and then you pass in the default value. So if I want the default value for name to be default name, then that would look something like this. So now name is an optional argument, and that it essentially just means that it's optional. Like we don't have to pass anything in for it, but we can. Like if we don't pass anything in, our function will still work. So just for example, to demonstrate this, you see now if we don't pass anything in for name, but we call our function, you see we get hello default name. So if you don't pass anything in explicitly as the argument, then it'll use the default value. So optional arguments allow you to call a function without passing in data, but they still allow you to pass in data. So parameters can be of any type. So for example, if we wanted a function to take in a list as an argument and print the list individually, then that would look something like this. So we'd say define print list, and then in parentheses, we need a parameter for the list, and we'll make it an optional argument. So we'll set the default value to be just an empty list. So if we don't pass anything in, then list will just be an empty list. And then we'll follow that with the colon, and then on the next line we'll indent, and then we'll use a for loop to iterate over the items of the list. So for item in list, print item. And now when we call print list, then nothing will happen now because it's iterating over an empty list. So nothing happens. But then if we pass in, say, like a list of fruits, so then if we pass in a list of fruits and then run our code, then you see we get the print statements for each fruit. Okay, so lastly, a function can return data. So all the functions that we've done in this video have not returned anything, because all they've just done is just print something. But sometimes we want to return a value. So for example, like we might want to pass in something as the argument, maybe modify the argument, and then we'll return the modified argument. So for example, if we wanted a function that, say, added 5 to whatever number we pass in, then we could do something like this. We would define a function called like add 5, and then we'll have to pass in a number. So num is our argument, so we'll be passing in some number to this function, and then we'll just return num plus 5. Okay, so our function is going to accept a number as the parameter, and then it'll return that number plus 5. So if we call our function, say add 5, and then if we just pass in, say 1, then let's run our code, and you'll see nothing happens. Well, something did happen, but we're not printing the output. We're making a call to our function. So if we actually want to see the output of the function, then we can set a variable equal to that. So we can just set x equal to add 5 of 1. So x will be equal to whatever our add 5 function returns. So if you see, we're passing in 1 as the num. So num is going to be 1 in this case. So we're returning num plus 5. So num plus 5 is 6. So we're actually returning 6. So add 5 of 1 is equivalent to 6. So then when we set x equal to add 5 of 1, we're actually setting x equal to 6. Just to show you all, if we print x, now you see we can get the output. So this function here returns an integer value, but our function's return value can be of any type. So we could actually return a boolean, a list, an integer, a string, any of the types that we've talked about. We can return those from a function. So the last thing I want to talk about is the pass keyword. And just like in the if statement video, pass can be used in functions. So for example, if we have a function, myfunc, then sometimes we don't necessarily know exactly what we want to do just yet. We have to have some sort of code underneath the indentation. Because, like, for example, if we were to try to call myfunc, then we're going to get an error because there's no code associated with the function. See, for example, we get this indentation error, expected an indented block. So it's expecting there to be code underneath this function. So if we know that we want a function, but we don't necessarily want to define it yet, then we can just use the pass keyword. So pass is essentially just like an empty print statement. It's not doing anything. It's not going to change anything. It'll just avoid getting this error. So now if we try to call our function, it'll let us call our function without causing any error, but it's not going to do anything. It's just passing. So hopefully that makes sense. So pass is essentially just a placeholder for when we don't want to actually define our function just yet. So that's about it for functions. Thank you all for watching, and see y'all next time.